Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of Film Study. This is Ken McCusick, and we're back for the next of our season reviews, position group reviews. Tonight, the running backs, and joining me to do that is Jim Zipko. Jim, how you doing?
Great, thanks, Ken. How are you?
Always a pleasure talking football with you. As you know, you always go by your handle on the RSR boards, but and other places like Twitter and Blue Sky, I guess now. And
Yep,
where else are you?
Threads.
Threads. All right, very good.
But actually, really, I'm just wearing sackcloth and ashes and in mourning over the way the Ravens season ended. So I'm nowhere for probably the next few weeks, at least until the Super Bowl's over.
That's it. Just pull the blanket over your head, sleep as
That's
many
right.
hours per day as possible, and let
Yes.
Depression Kitty do her job. Yeah. So, all right. That's from Big Mouth, the show, by the way. Really good show if you haven't seen it. Um, so a great year for the running backs, obviously for the Ravens. A great year for the run game in general. One of the greatest again of all time. We keep having to say it every year with Lamar having a healthy season that the Ravens running game is one of the greatest in the history of the National Football League. But Monken has really maintained a lot of the run DNA of this team to maximize Jackson, which is outstanding. And he faced his first major test this year with two productive running backs leaving the organization, Edwards and Dobbins, that had done very well in terms of success rate, yards per carry, frankly, whatever measures you want to use, largely leaning on the escapability and need for a defense to attend to Lamar Jackson.
It's amazing. I don't know if you remember back when Terrell Davis was inducted into the Hall of Fame, but I got into a bunch of arguments with people back then because I'm argumentative that Terrell Davis was a creation of the Denver running system, the Alex Gibbs blocking scheme, the light running backs, the Gibbs Shanahan, the whole game. And my rejoinder to that was, yeah, that running game did produce. Um, it made Alandis Gary a 1,000-yard rusher. It made Mike Anderson a 1,000-yard rusher. It made all of these guys, Tatum Bell, a 1,000-yard rusher. Terrell Davis rushed for 2,000 yards. That's different. So you take a running back friendly environment that can help, Alandis Gary or Tatum Bell get 1,000. You put Terrell Davis in there, you get 2,000. So now we have, bringing us back to Lamar Jackson, Gus Edwards stands next to Lamar Jackson in the backfield. J.K. Dobbins stands next to Lamar Jackson in the backfield, and they have historic, success rates. And then you bring in a running back who's great already. You bring in Derrick Henry, you get a 1,900-yard season. And to me, that's kind of the tail of it. Like, one of the most running back friendly environments is standing next to, being the person who gets to stand next to Lamar Jackson in the backfield. You take a great running back and put him in that environment, and you just get an explosion.
Yeah, you get some absurd results. And Terrell Davis's record for total yards in a season still has not been caught, including regular and postseason. But Barkley, I believe, is very close right now. Barkley's
Very
at
close.
20.
I think he's something like 40 away or something like that. I
Okay.
believe that record's going to fall.
All right. I know the record was right around 2,500. He's at, I think, 2,447. So we'll see. I'm sure it will probably fall. Ravens did not really have a big swing in the draft. Rasheen Ali, a fifth-round pick, was an overdraft. I think we'll agree now. Maybe we won't agree, but we'll have minimal time to discuss him because he basically didn't play the entire season.
I have a hard time calling a fifth rounder an overdraft just because that's so late in the draft. I mean, maybe he should not have been drafted at all.
But yeah, well, that makes him an overdraft, right? Ben Mason,
okay,
overdraft.
Yeah. You and I had a long podcast episode about that, about how they didn't know Patrick Ricard's health. He had just had the surgery. They drafted from a position of need to solve a problem that they thought they might have. Yes, he turned out to be an overdraft, but car insurance is wasted money if you don't get in an accident, but you could spend it anyway. I think that he was an overdraft, but a forgivable overdraft. Talking about Ben Mason now.
Yeah, I'm not in the same position. I think there are players they really needed at other positions at that point that I didn't agree with the pick. And I'm the same way on Ali. I had 4 players pegged out on draft night that I would have liked better.
Yeah.
At that exact spot in round 5. I also didn't think Ali was necessarily going to get drafted at all. If he had, it would have been later. And he's a pretty significant fumbler in college, which already I think hurt him in terms of playing time as a rookie. I don't think he necessarily fumbled during the regular season, but he He fumbled a ball after the whistle was blown in the preseason, and when he had just a horrific game all the way around, and that was not a good look for him. He didn't have a lot of carries. What he had was in mop-up duty. We don't need to talk about him to a great degree. The big news, obviously, they signed Derrick Henry to a 2-year deal.
Yes.
One of the great free agent values the Ravens have had of all time. I think the best compliment I heard of his season was that Aaron Schatz said it was the best of any running back this century. And that's obviously in a year where he does not even get All-Pro 1.
That's based on what, DR?
I think so. I think so. But he may be judging it based on 5 different things he's looking at, DR being one of them.
My understanding is that the Ravens played a more difficult schedule of opposing defenses than the Eagles did. So Henry probably gets the benefit of some defensive adjustments that might vault him ahead of Barkley, even if the standard stats wouldn't have him there.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are other advanced metrics that look very good for Henry too. We'll get into them when we get into talking about Derrick specifically. But
you mentioned Rashaan Ali, and I had a question for you about him. If we obviously we don't want to spend much time talking about him,
sure,
but if we can go back in our minds to before Justice Hill became an excellent player, and go back in our minds to before Keaton Mitchell looked like a potential Hall of Famer in 2023, how does Rashaan Ali compare to those guys kind of before their emergence?
I mean, first of all, we'd have to go before 23 because Hill broke out in 23 and so did Mitchell. So you're in the 24 draft. You don't have any excuses for not understanding the relativity of those 3 players, even though Hill elevated again and Mitchell took a step back. So I'm going to start with that. But in terms of how does he compare to where those players were, I think I would have,
as rookies.
I would have had Mitchell higher than Ali in the same draft. Hill, okay. I'm not so sure. It's been a number of years. Obviously, Hill was drafted in 2018.
Yeah, a long time ago. I thought it was 19, but it was a while ago.
You're right. It's 19. It's 19. It's in the first draft. All right. So, a lot of good things about the Ravens' run game this year. Obviously, the yardage stands out and all that. The yards per carry were the best in the NFL. They were still able to run the ball effectively, though. This is the really big one. When opponents knew it was coming, so they were able to close out games with the runs quite effectively this year.
Yes, and to me there's hard value in terms of Derrick Henry's 1,900 yards and all of that stuff. To me, there's soft value there as well, which is the wear and tear that Lamar does not take finishing out games with the running game, grinding out like 7 or 8 yards and first downs and stuff to keep the clock moving in the fourth quarter.
Completely agree. And that's a really important factor there for for so much about the Ravens season, because the Ravens season is over, obviously, the moment that Lamar Jackson goes down in any year.
Yes.
But definitely every hit you can take off his plate is a big deal.
I don't know, by my eye test, I thought that Lamar looked fresher late in the season than we had seen him in prior years.
Yeah, he had a lull in carries about 2/3 of the way through, didn't carry much until the last couple of games, started up again, and then carried that on into the playoffs. And as soon as you're in the playoffs, I mean, all limits are off on usage. So I think they played it right. I think they'll play it that way again. If it comes to it, they'll pick and choose their games where they want to have him run less. But also, a lot of that's determined on the opponent. So if you're going to have a successful read option game, and your opponent says, "I'm going after Derrick Henry every play," or your opposing read edge defender goes after the running back every play. Well, obviously there's good assignment football that needs to be played. If they feel like their best chance to get Jackson on the ground is not with Watt, but with having Deshaun Elliott, say, go out on that side and control the edge, then Lamar's going to have to run the ball. He's going to have to make Deshaun Elliott miss. And it's just what it is. So the people who say, why didn't they have Lamar carry the ball more? I mean, it's not the nature of the read option. The read option,
they called option
the best
plays,
choice.
And then the defense told them, dictated where it was going to go.
You could say, why didn't you pass more rather than expose Lamar to these hits or whatever? But you don't have the choice. And in a read option running game, I always have to kind of scoff or smirk every time I hear somebody say that. in terms of what. Well, they didn't. The opponent has say in the matter. They get to choose. All right.
Did you have a sense? I have no data on this, and I haven't looked anywhere for it. But do you? It seems to me that the Ravens this past year also ran more of a standard, no option, just standard handoff running game than they had in previous years, with Derrick Henry as the recipient. Are you aware of any stats that bear that out?
Well, they have the difference between zone and gap scheme running.
Mm-hmm.
You're okay. Either one can be a read option.
Right.
Okay. But when you run zone, you're always threatening to play action in my book.
Yes.
So you're
Or bootleg or yeah.
Yeah. The misdirection of running back and quarterback is always an option that needs to be covered and is something that benefits potentially the offense. So you're down to not that much when you talk about how much did they just run some sort of power scheme where nobody's getting the ball but Henry, and there wasn't even the threat of it. I mean, I think opposing defenses would probably say there's always a threat of Lamar Jackson keeping it on any handoff play. Now the kind of exception would be a short yardage dive play, but even that not too not too significant in terms of the total plays they ran the whole season. All right, want to move on to the next topic, which is the Ravens had their consecutive 100-yard game streak broken in the oddest of ways when they had 100 yards exactly versus Cincinnati in that second Cincinnati game that they won.
Right.
And finished it off with an NRM -1, a kneel, basically for a loss of 1 that took them from 100 down to 99. Absolutely comical. But I'm sure Vic Fangio was somewhere laughing at that.
I mean, so John Harbaugh cared when they played the Broncos to set that record against Fangio. And the fact that this happened is an indication to me that Harbaugh did not care this time around.
I think, it was the game had happened. I think they were going to get a share of the record that game, or maybe the next game. I forget which.
Yep.
But they didn't have it yet, and they already obviously had a share of the record beforehand. But if they'd gotten a second share of the record, that's maybe not as big a deal. And it's a lot of the same people involved who already have one. And frankly, they're already on their way to the next streak as it goes. I'm happier that Harbaugh basically didn't care about that, didn't try and run some sort of play. I guess if you want to give Rasheen Ali there a dive play to run, if you're gonna let the ball, then go ahead and run it. But it's not a must have as far as I'm concerned. As long as you run it right at the end of the clock, then there's not really a chance for a change of possession and a play to be run, which obviously was the problem in that game, which was decided by 1 point, right? 35-34. That was the 35-34 game.
Yeah.
All right. Otherwise, one thing we've seen in the 2 years under Monken is that Ricard has been used a lot less heavy packages overall, less super heavy. And Ricard has been down to under 40% of snaps both years. And yet they're still maintaining most of the DNA of the run game. They're just doing it a little bit differently in terms of how they use their heavies.
Ricard's being used less than Greg Roman used Ricard.
Yes.
But a lot more than most teams use their fullback.
Of course.
Okay.
Yeah, the Ravens.
So yeah, I think that's So Monken shifted the balance to be kind of a 50-50 pass run offense, but like the fullback is still a more significant presence in Baltimore than almost anywhere else in the league.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Ravens still are the heaviest team in the entire NFL. Other than, I think the Dolphins were surprisingly heavy this year, but
that's weird.
They're basically the heaviest team in the NFL still. I think it probably ended up that way. Any kind of graph will show the Ravens way out to the right in terms of the number of tight ends, fullbacks, and OL6s on the field normally. Yeah. But Ricard is not necessarily one of the guys. And it's kind of an interesting thing to talk about the tight ends just briefly in this running back show. Is really great year of tight end blocking in particular that they got. Isaiah Likely took a huge step forward. And one of the really big reasons to try and sign him as opposed to Andrews, and I think they'll only be able to keep one of the two, would be to maintain that run blocking effectiveness after after Andrews is gone, if that's the way the club goes.
I mean, and certainly likely significantly younger.
Mm-hmm.
I, I think we know how this goes, right? Like the pure the hard-hearted logic of it is you keep the younger player and let the older player go, but the older player is an all-pro, and the Ravens do not callously cast aside their homegrown, home drafted all-pros.
No, they don't, but they've had to let some go when the money didn't make sense. The problem is Andrews is probably going to make it completely as easy as he can for the Ravens to sign him,
Yeah,
which is going to really mean that likely prices himself out of Baltimore effectively.
that's unfortunate.
Yeah, because he's the younger player and he will command more dollars. And by the way, if they're talking about signing Andrews now, it means they've already talked to Likely and found that price point is not going to work out.
Oh,
And
really? Okay.
yeah, I mean that's a business 101, right? I mean they've
Yeah.
invested all avenues for the investment of those dollars, and maybe there's some universe where they sign both of them. I think the chance is about 10% that they sign both. Okay,
What's
maybe
interesting
it
to
might
me
be
is
less.
if you think of Charlie Kolar, to me, Kolar is a fantastic replacement for Andrews and not for Likely, just in terms of their physical kind of qualities.
Right. He's also a fantastic replacement probably for like Nick Boyle. He's more of an inline blocker, which is not bad. That's
Yeah.
good. That's a good player. He's a good inline blocker. You can get him at a reasonable price. I think this year.
I think Likely's faster. I think Likely's, better deep. I think he's better at the contested catches at this point. So this is, yeah, it's a regret to me to, you think that's 50-50 maybe?
We're on the running backs. Let's not stray
All
too
right,
far
all right.
here. I wanted to, they're having to make a decision, but they're making an informed decision if they sign Andrews. You got to trust the process and know that DeCosta's already reached out to Likely's agent, said, "Hey, we can extend you early right now. We were thinking X over Y years," and
Yeah.
they said, "No, we're thinking more like X plus 20 million over those same number of years." And
Right.
I say, "Okay, this might not work out. We have to talk to Andrews too about this and whatnot." So there's an opportunity. There's a lot of divisible benefit on the table with those third-year players, and this is the year the Ravens need to take advantage of it. All right, let's talk about some of the individual. Well, before we go into this, the Ravens running backs had a great year as receivers this year too, just as a group. I mean, Derrick Henry is good as a receiver. Hill was at his best year by far
Yeah.
as a receiver, and Keaton Mitchell only had one catch, but it was for 28 yards, and now is up there with the highest yards per target, even in limited action of any Raven in history. The all-time leader now. Do you know who it is? With I think it's 10 or
Yards per
more.
target?
Yeah, 10 or more targets career.
I wanted to say at one point it was Gus Edwards.
That's correct. It was Gus Edwards, but last year, one guy passed him and one guy basically tied him. The guy who tied him was Derrick Henry, right? Derrick Henry. I think that's right. I'll have to look at this again. It may not be Derrick Henry. But the guy who passed him anyway, Charlie Kolar.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Okay. So Kolar's now at 10.3 career. It was a great year for yards per target around all the receivers, of course, but the running backs in particular did a great job. We'll talk about some of that as we go through player by player.
Yeah, I can't wait to go through player by player. So I'm going to keep quiet.
Well, let's do that. Derrick Henry.
Okay.
So we look back at the greatest Ravens free agent signings ever, and you look at maybe Trevor Price, Michael McCrary, Rod Woodson. It's Sam Adams. Maybe it was fantastic value for 2 years there. Tony,
do you give special credit for the Super Bowl? Like Shannon Sharpe, I don't know how the dollars work out. But
sure.
Yeah.
And they've had a fair number of terrible ones. The 2001 had two of the really bad ones in Elvis Gerback and Leon Searcy, who never played it down for the Ravens.
Oh, right.
That was an awful signing. But this is Derrick Henry has to go in as one of the greatest ever. And I have to go back and look at this and say, I really did not like this contract originally when it was signed. I didn't like going to a lot of money going to a running back.
Yeah, and as I recall, when you and I spoke about it before, you indicated because Lamar is really the force multiplier in the running game. You could get a clown to stand next to him and still have a decent yards per carry and a decent running game. So the investiture in a star running back wasn't so, could be seen as unjustified. And I take it your views have evolved a little bit as the season went on.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, you don't want to become wedded to any position, and you need to be able to move on. I'm at a different place on a few things, but definitely the signing Henry situation now seems like a real bargain. An incredible year, obviously, across the NFL for free agent running backs proving their worth, with the primary two being the best two rushers in the National Football League with Saquon and Derek. Um, I think I'll have some evolution on the thought of whether or not anyone could be as effective as Henry. Because if you look at Lamar's history, there's been a sharp uptick in before and after, or after and before, for
Right.
every running back he's ever played with, basically.
Yeah. Well, so we even see that with Henry. Henry's had a sharp
Yes.
uptick. He had
yeah.
his largest yards per carry of his entire career. He was already a Hall of Fame career, mind you, and he arrives in Baltimore and he exceeds whatever he's done before in yards per carry. He had his highest yards before contact per attempt this year. So we see, we do see the jump in effectiveness, even with Derrick Henry. It's just a jump from a very high place to an even higher place.
Right. And that's obviously, that's very impressive and much harder to do. But success rate was a place where Henry was a guy who was in the middle of the league, at 46% the last 3 years. 49.3% career is very good.
Yeah.
But he jumped to 58.8%.
Yeah.
In fact, had the second greatest season of all time for anyone with 300 carries. I think it's actually 230 or more carries. Was the limit. The one guy who was ahead of him was Edgerrin James. Edgerrin James in 2004 or thereabouts had a year at 58.9 or 59.0. But either way, it was just a smidge ahead of Henry. And
so you see a Hall of Fame, a guy who was already a Hall of Fame running back, getting a boost from playing with Lamar Jackson. And we are skirting dangerously close to one of my hobby horses this January. I've been yelling at people on the internet about this idea that Lamar Jackson should not be the MVP because he was partnered with Derrick Henry. So I can yell for 10 minutes about that if you have any moment to
we can go into it, but we probably don't even need to yell that loud. I mean, I think it's fairly ridiculous. The everybody who's an MVP plays with other great players. First of all, part of the thing is you get there because you're on a good team, generally speaking. You need to have wins to support any sort of argument for MVP. So Joe Burrow can't be there. And Joe Burrow probably has the weakest case if you want to use those two things only, wins and the other players around him, because he certainly played with some great receivers in terms of elevating his own passing stats. But in Lamar's case, you could point to to Derrick Henry, but Derrick Henry and Lamar made the rushing game work without a particularly exceptional offensive line.
I would say, in fact, Josh Allen had the best offensive line in the AFC.
We certainly had one of them. Yeah, probably right. There's a lot of good. I mean, the Eagles are the best offensive line in the NFL, I would say. Yeah, you're in the same place on that.
Yeah, I mean, maybe the Lions were neck and neck, although I think the Lions' health issues may have impacted that.
Right. All right. So anyway, let's keep going a little bit with Derrick Henry's season. So statistically, I'll go through this really quickly. Jumped to a career high in yards per carry at 5.9, success rate of 58.8. His career previously was 49.3. So big boost out of that.
That's 10 points higher in success rate, for God's sake.
It's absurd. It's absurd. It's the kind of jump that if you don't ascribe some of that to Lamar Jackson, you're a fool. But I think it's great evidence for the Lamar deserves a 15% commission on all rushing yards.
Yes,
yeah, that's for sure.
Please tip your servers and your MVP quarterback.
Yes, 1,921 yards, 16 rushing TDs. That led the NFL the latter. 8.8 yards per target as a receiver, so he wasn't the 10.0 guy, and he's still only AP2. It is what it is in terms of his thing. And by the way, no problem with Saquon.
Of course not.
Winning AP1. Derrick did have the best rush yards over expectation also by next gen stats, including both aggregate and per play. He was significantly above Saquon. So,
Yeah.
and
So
there were
I
some
think
guys
that
that,
that repeats the theme. That's what Aaron Schatz was saying too. I
yeah,
mean, he's talking about his own advanced stats, which are defense adjusted. So I don't have any problem with, from an advanced analytics standpoint, Derrick Henry's season was probably greater than Saquon's. But that's similar to saying that like the 2000 Titans had a better defense by advanced analytics standard than the 2000 Ravens. Like maybe, but one accomplished what they accomplished and the other did not. So you get a 2,000-yard season, you're going to be the all-pro running back. I mean, that's just how that
yeah,
works.
it's yeah, fair enough. The 3.60 yards after contact was fifth among running backs. The 88 missed tackles forced that led all runners. And he's still the Ravens' best pass blocker as well. It doesn't get on the field for too many pass plays because of how the Ravens like to rest him and keep him fresh and whatnot for running downs. Whether or not he's really a better option than Hill is, I think they're both explosive in terms of what
Yeah.
they can provide you on third down. You need to somehow split the snaps.
I was surprised to see in the pregame in our pre-show meeting this note about Henry being the Ravens' best pass blocking running back, because Hill to me is extremely impressive as a pass blocker.
He works very
And
hard.
yeah, and so but I assume that this is statistically off of your tracking.
I don't have other. I don't grade the running backs when blocking, but there's no doubt that Henry is a better blocker, has been for years, and Hill does the best he can as a smaller man to try
Right.
and block, and does a pretty good job. He's not a bad blocker, and he's a good receiver. So you have that combination is a nice thing to have on third down, but there isn't. Neither of those things is he obviously better than Derrick Henry at.
Okay.
Derrick Henry could be a very effective guy if you wanted to run your pass game through him, or extend your run game with a kind of a screen game. I think you could do very well with Derrick Henry, but Hill provides you snap relief and real value in there on some passing downs that is otherwise valuable and dangerous.
Is some of that the just the sheer physicality that Henry has compared to Justice Hill?
Sure. I mean, he's
Yeah.
a 247-pound man versus a 185-pound man, or whatever
Sure.
the difference is in their weight, is going to have a much better time blocking anybody.
That makes sense. Yeah.
What else do we have to talk about here? They did not have pony looks this year, essentially. Now they were having a handful early on where they had both Hill and Henry in the game. There's very, very few RB3 snaps the entire year, by the way.
Yeah.
But they had a few pony snaps early in the year, and my assumption was that they kind of wanted to keep that in the playbook for when Keaton Mitchell got back, that they would want to use more pony and have it kind of ready to go, have the team ready to run some of those plays. Never materialize.
So yes, but I mean that some of that to me seems to be going with the hot hand and what was working, because they had, statistically one of the best offensive seasons, it's certainly in the history of DVOA. So I can understand. I guess I want to say two things about that. If they were preserving a personnel grouping for when Keaton Mitchell came back, Keaton Mitchell was kind of unimpressive initially when he came back.
Oh yeah.
So I can see them thinking that the juice was not worth the squeeze there, and no reason to break fix what wasn't broken.
Yeah, let me be clear about this. I'm not saying, damn it, the Ravens didn't play pony.
Okay.
What the hell are they doing here?
Okay.
I'm not saying that at all.
Okay.
The Ravens didn't play a pony, and I kind of like observing pony when it comes on the field, and
Sure.
and then I think there's some explosiveness that evolves from it. But if you really can find value or find a problem with the Ravens offense in 2024, you got to look on a 10 or 25x microscope to try and do it.
Okay.
I saw somebody who was complaining basically about the yak at tight end and saying the Ravens were 17th in the NFL in yak at tight end. They're going to need to improve that. Well, no,
they don't need to improve.
They had 143.5 passer rating throwing to the tight ends. They've had 30 touchdowns and one interception over the last 2 seasons combined.
Yeah, they do
literally
not
the greatest. So, all right. So anyway, we talked a little bit, I guess, about whether or not Lamar is less valuable because of Henry. Do you have any other comments on that? Any other
Oh
thoughts
my
on
God, I have so many comments on that.
that?
So I would say, first of all, the idea that Derrick Henry's greatness is an indicator that Lamar Jackson should not be the MVP. There are at least 2 or 3 serious problems with that. And the first is something that you alluded to, which is great teammates that MV quarterbacks have had. Now, I've looked at the last 50 years of the AP MVP award, and I would like to rattle off a bunch of winners to you. Now, these are all quarterbacks who won MVP while they had a teammate at one of the eligible positions, an offensive skill position, who was either first team or second team All Pro
Okay.
that same year. All right.
You probably have some
So
Hall of Famers in there, I'm sure, too.
yeah, but let's start recently. Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce.
Mhm.
Aaron, that's 2022. 2021, Aaron Rodgers and Devontae Adams. Adams was first team All Pro that year. 2020, Aaron Rodgers and Adams. 2018, Patrick Mahomes and Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce. That's 2 first team All Pro receivers. 2017, Tom Brady and a guy you may have heard of named Rob Gronkowski.
Okay.
2016, Matt Ryan and Julio Jones. 2013, Peyton Manning and Demaryius Thomas. 2009, Peyton Manning and Reggie
Okay.
Wayne and
Randy
Dallas
Moss.
Clark.
No, that's it. That's it. That's it. I'm sorry. I thought we were getting the Patriots teams, but we're not there yet. Go ahead.
Now we are. 2007, Tom Brady and Randy Moss and
Mhm.
Wes Welker. They were all pros. Tom Brady was MVP. 2004, Peyton Manning with Marvin Harrison and Edgerrin James. Harrison and James were both first team All Pro. Peyton Manning was MVP.
And Edgerrin James, that was the year he set the record for the success rate in a season.
Yep. 2003, Manning and Harrison. 2001, Kurt Warner and Marshall Faulk. In 2000, Marshall Faulk was MVP and Kurt Warner was merely All Pro. 1999, Kurt Warner was MVP and Marshall Faulk was first team All Pro, and Isaac Bruce was also All Pro. 1994, Steve Young and a guy you may have heard of by the name of Jerry friggin' Rice.
Was Terrell Owens around by then? No, he wasn't. He wasn't in the league.
Not on the Niners. Yeah, 1992, Steve Young and Rice. 1990, Joe Montana and Jerry Rice. Now, I've got 15 more years of this to go, and I want to get to it, but let me just point out that if Jerry Rice does not invalidate a quarterback's case for MVP, then I don't want to hear about Derrick Henry. You know what I'm saying? Like, all right. 1989, Joe Montana and Jerry Rice and John Taylor and Roger Craig. That's 3.
Got to give you the hook here. I'm completely convinced, and I think there's 2 groups out there. Okay, so let's think about them for a second. There's 68% of the people listening to this show or higher already think, no problem, Lamar Jackson's the MVP.
Okay.
It doesn't matter if he had Derrick Henry. There's 30.7% of the people who think, who are Bills fans who are already pissed off about everything in life.
Yeah.
And the only scrap of hope they have for the remainder of the season is that Josh Allen, their guy who they've boosted the entire season, wins it. And then there's 1.3% who could be convinced, and we're not going to take the time to do it. So just
okay. Well, so the summary is that the presence of an All-Pro teammate has never invalidated the MVP candidacy of an MVP quarterback. Not as far back as Kenny Stabler in 1974 with Cliff Branch. It just does not happen. So, so the whole premise of the argument is BS. And then on top of that, you stack the information we have about how it's statistically obvious that that Lamar Jackson has elevated Derrick Henry's play. You know, so that by itself, you know, that also invalidates it. And further, Lamar Jackson had a historic season, you know, 40 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. Josh Allen did not. He had a distinctly non-historic season. And Lamar played a far more difficult schedule of opposing defenses.
Now we're talking, though. This is one of the really important things, is that the quality of opponents is a very significant thing. I think of all the arguments out there, I think quality of opponents is the best, because the Ravens in 23 and 24 have the 2 highest totals for wins versus winning teams in the entire history of the National Football League.
Yeah.
10 and 9. And I think there may be no other team with 9 still. If there is, there's one other team with 9. The Chiefs were threatening it, and then they actually didn't get it because they punted to Denver, and then Atlanta lost in the final game. And, so some funny things happened at the end of the season to make it be true. But it's still the Ravens' record of beating the crap out of most of those teams, including Buffalo this year, and the 5 teams that they really slaughtered last year by 2 touchdowns plus. Just
hard. So to the 1% out there, there's 3 prongs of this. There's the MVP has never been strictly about philosophical discussions of value. It's always been to the most outstanding player. Great teammates have never detracted from an MVP's case. Lamar had a historic season and Josh Allen did not. Lamar did it against a much, much more difficult slate of opponents than Josh Allen did. It's don't bring me this stuff anymore. I am tired of it.
And so also a regular season award. It's not a lifetime achievement award or including the postseason award. So it's voted on when it's voted on, and that's the way it goes.
And I hate being in this position because Josh Allen's a very fine player. He's not like a chump. But it's the argument is bogus. It's got no legs to stand on, and I'm a little mad about it.
All right, well, fair enough. So this is the running back show. So we're going to go back and we're going to talk a little bit about Justice Hill next.
Yes.
First of all, let's talk about Derrick Henry. One more item. Is there a price at which they can extend him that you would be happy with? So
can or should?
Should.
No.
You'd let him walk after one more year, period.
I would absolutely let him walk after one more year. I would let him walk after one more year, and in my fantasy world, Keaton Mitchell comes back like gangbusters last year and proves that Derrick Henry is expendable. But there's a difference to me between a 30-year-old running back arriving in a fantastic situation and having a fantastic season versus a 32-year-old running back in his 3rd season in this circumstance. I think that price is always a factor. If he wants to come back for vet minimum and be running back 3 and a mentor and a buddy, okay, sure, there is some price. But from a practical standpoint, no, I would like him to play this season and then for the Ravens to replace him.
It would have to be an extension right now. I think the Ravens may be forced into the situation anyway. I'm not saying there's no price, and I'd certainly do it if he wanted to tack on a year at $8, $9, $10 million, I probably am going to check that box right now. I'm probably going to say, okay. I think and that's a big change for me because I was not there to start the year. Now you'd be a year removed. You'd be paying for the 2nd year effectively of a 2-year contract, which I didn't like, going into this season, obviously.
Right.
Things have changed. Henry, the athlete that I compare Henry to is Nolan Ryan, is that he's just this extraordinary special case. And don't try and tell me that every athlete, especially older receivers, are this special case, because most of them are not. 99.5% of them are not. But they got a guy who had a great fastball into his mid-40s, and that's effectively where Henry is playing 2 years from now, in his mid-40s in a relative sense, being a 32-year-old running
and an
back.
athlete who had talk about Nolan Ryan now, had the most economical, like biomechanical delivery of a ball that had ever been observed. Tremendous leg strength and drive. He could pitch into his 40s because he was special in a variety of ways, and some of them were biomechanical. And and Derrick Henry has made himself special in some of those same ways, like the way he takes care of his body, his recovery regime, and obviously his strength / size / speed package is pretty unique. So I could be talked into the case that he could continue to be effective, but I don't think it's a great idea.
Okay, so you are right now. You would not extend him for that extra year.
Correct.
You would wait for the. Didn't you know it's possible to get THC shipped right to your door? Mood delivers premium, 100% federally legal THC directly to you. I'm talking about delicious, high-potency gummies, top-shelf flour, home-baked cookies, vapes, anything you'd find at a dispensary, you can now order online and have it shipped quickly, discreetly, and conveniently right to your door. And every Mood product is made from pesticide-free cannabis grown on America's best small farms at prices that won't destroy your wallet. Best of all, not only is every Mood product backed by a 100-day satisfaction guarantee, but as I mentioned, listeners get 20% off their first order with code RAVENS. So head to mood.com/ravens, check out their online dispensary, and let Mood help you discover your perfect mood. And don't forget to use promo code RAVENS when you check out to save 20% on your first order. This year to play out. And one of the nice frictions the Ravens have, if they just allow it to play out, is that Derrick Henry has to know that Lamar Jackson was a big factor in his success, because he's sure as hell knows that getting hit behind the line of scrimmage as often as he did with Tennessee, and I think he had he went from 0.5 yards past the line of scrimmage for his average first point of contact. It's about that, to 2.3
that's huge.
year. Yeah, so I mean, it's an enormous difference.
Well, I don't think we have to speculate to say like he has to know. Like he has said many, many, many times that Lamar is the reason, and you always have to regard with a certain amount of grain of salt. Like teammates talk each other up, they clap each other on the back and say this guy's the greatest, but what he's saying is just the simple truth. Lamar makes things easy for him. I mean, we saw Pittsburgh defenders over and over choose, to chase Lamar at the mesh point rather than chase Henry. I mean, we've seen it in action, and Henry's just reporting what our eyes are telling us.
Definitely something, though, that when he considers what team he wants to play for in 2026, he's more likely to say, you know what, tell me what your best offer is. I think we got a chance for a ring here, and I certainly like playing with Lamar.
Yeah.
He might choose to play for $2 million less, playing in Baltimore. Wouldn't shock me if he were willing to do that thing. Also wouldn't shock me if it's not a matter of $2 million and somebody signs him for 3 for $30. And the Ravens they wouldn't match that, I'm sure.
If the Ravens won a Super Bowl next year, do you think Henry is? Yeah, that's what Henry's out the door. You would think
for sure.
Yeah,
I mean, first of all, he'll have his ring. There'll be offers on the table, and if the Ravens win a Super Bowl, there'll be all kinds of demands for money to be spent otherwise. So I think the Ravens will have to find out where they economize, and he'll be one of the unfortunate casualties of that decision-making process.
I'm choking on that word unfortunate. He's a wonderful player. He's a tremendous asset to a team, to a culture, like all of that stuff.
How about we say heartbreaking then? Because that's really what I mean.
32-year-old running backs should be moving on. Like that's just, the circle of life.
Would you, if the Ravens won the Super Bowl this next year and Derrick Henry rushes for 1,500 yards plus?
Yeah.
Does he make the Ravens Ring of Honor as a 2-year player?
I got no problem with that.
I got no problem with it either. Shannon Sharpe is in, right? I think he's in the Ring of Honor. I'm not 100% sure. If he's not, then that would be an indication there. But I think Derrick Henry would be in if he had another season like that. And that there's I don't know how many more mountains there are to climb for Henry. He's not headed to the top of the all-time NFL rushing leaders set, but he will climb that several ranks. But he's not reaching. He's not going to catch Emmitt Smith from where he is right now.
Right.
Yeah.
The more I think about that, the Ring of Honor question, I'm like, absolutely. I'm changing my answer to from no problem with it to absolutely. Yeah, that would be a fine acknowledgement to a deserving addition. To me, the extra piece is the piece that spares Lamar the burden of closing out games against cupcakes.
Yeah, that is no doubt about it, is a big thing. Gus Edwards was very good at that too. The Ravens in general have been good at this during the Lamar era, but they have had to lean on Lamar to do some of that, and that's
I've always felt that when Lamar was at the mesh point with every other back that he's played with in Baltimore, J.K. Dobbins, all of them, he always knew in the back of his mind, like, yeah, the defense might be indicating a give read here, but I can do more with this ball than my teammate can. Mm-hmm. And I'll hand it to him, but like I'm reserving the right to overrule the defensive situation because I'm that good. And fairly, by the way, I think that's like Michael Jordan maybe had faced that same calculation a lot of the time, give or go 1-on-3, and going 1-on-3 for Michael Jordan was often a better choice than passing it. I feel like Lamar was in that same situation, but he's at the mesh point with Derrick Henry, and Derrick Henry commands a certain amount of respect, even from Lamar, that makes a give more likely in 50-50 situations.
Probably true. And, he is generally reading a side, definitely an edge defender more than the what else is going on that side. And the defense just obviously does have a big say in it. One of the great things about Derrick Henry being here is that Derrick Henry forces more for Lamar to run the ball when the other team decides it. So when a lot of other teams had just made a decision, crash down on Lamar, period.
Oh yeah.
Even if you get him on the ground, you have a residual value from that. But with Derrick Henry, they really can't do that as much anymore. And he'll be very damaging if you try and have your edge defender really try and hold up to that run. You're probably giving something up because you need one of your bigger players to help put Derrick Henry on the ground.
Yeah. So you're saying that Derrick Henry's presence will lead to more keep reads for Lamar in the read option game, inevitably, because defenses will have to devote a certain amount of attention to Henry.
More keep reads and fewer Jackson crashes. Fewer crashes on Jackson is really what I'm talking about. So Jackson's going to take fewer hits without the football. How about if I say it that way?
Yes.
Okay. All right, let's move on and talk about Justice Hill, because he split the snaps with Henry. It was an effective two-back system. Henry had 635 snaps. Hill had 414. The rest of the guys all put together probably had less than 100. His versatility, we talked about a little bit earlier, being a pass catcher and a very effective runner. And by the way, he ran for 4.9 yards per carry this year. It's not like that's nothing or anything.
He had a tremendous season. I'm kind of super proud of him. He leveraged himself up into being a super effective player in this system. He's just improved every aspect of his game year over year over year.
Yeah, very dangerous on draw plays. We saw very dangerous, and this is my big one because we chart set and chip blocking for Justice Hill, and Justice Hill had an enormous responsibility protecting Roger Rosengarten's side this year a lot, and also picking up blitzes for teams that wanted to rush an odd man from the secondary or from linebacker as needed. But when Justice Hill is most effective as a receiver, he has no blocking assignment. And he's a free release, and he's a very good at sitting down and finding space behind the line of scrimmage and then turning that into a big play. And he ran some good wheel routes this year. I'm not minimizing what he did down the field, but he's devastating on third down, making people miss to get that first down this year.
And that is a miss. So the running back reception game was a missing piece of the Greg Roman offense.
Yeah.
And to see it really blossom this year in year 2 under Monken, just really, it's just an extra dimension. Made the Ravens that much more dangerous.
Yeah, it really, Hill was used so much as a blocker, and I want to go to this for a second, but his yards per target this year was up to, I think, 7.5 for the year, which is very high for a running back.
Yeah, that's a receiver's number, a wide receiver number.
Yards per target was 7.5. It would be a bad wide receiver number, but yeah, it's a wide receiver number.
No, it would be close to middle of the road. It would not be a starter in your fantasy league, but in terms of like averages in leagues, probably just below average for an NFL wide receiver.
Okay, fair enough. But he's up to 6.0 yards per target career. Prior this year, he's only 5.0 yards per target.
Yeah, and that's more of a running back's number. Running backs' yards per targets are usually very low.
They're lower, but 5.0 is even bad for a running back. Hill didn't have a great catch rate in his career going into this year, going into this last year. This year, he's thrown the ball 51 times, caught 42 of them, which is quite good for a running back. Actually, his catch rate doesn't look that bad in previous years either. So it's mostly about yards per reception that he looked a lot better. His rookie year, he had eight receptions and 15 targets and 8.3 yards per reception, which led to still crappy yards per target of 4.7. But in other years, he's had a higher catch rate. He just hasn't done it for any yards. And I think a lot of that honestly has to do with the fact that after he chips, his number of routes that he can run is highly compromised in terms of what he can do. And he can't, obviously he's going to be less involved in things like wheel routes or anything down the field where you get a big chunk play going. But he also is going to be less able to concern himself initially with space and how do I get out and how do I, make this linebacker think I'm somewhere else.
Right.
All of that.
He has to work with the space that is left over after he's executed his chip responsibility.
Exactly. Yeah.
So this is not statistical, but my visual impression of him as a rookie was that he was fighting the ball when he was thrown. You know,
Mhm.
when he was throwing passes, and he had some dropsies, and he's become just a tremendously reliable receiver, I think.
Yeah, they've certainly they've used him a lot more. It's great to see him get those extra chances. Monken got up at the podium early in the thing, and he was talking about how do you get Bateman the ball more? And he goes, well, some of his scheme, but also just think about any sport. Think about, if you're playing baseball, you get to start if you're hitting well. If you're on the basketball court, you get tossed the ball when your teammates think you can make the shot.
Right.
So that's part of the thing. So he said, it was on him too, and I think Bateman and probably Hill as well both came out well in this, but scheme definitely benefited Hill this year in terms of the games in particular that he was exceptional at. Buffalo, Denver, the New York Giants. He had far less in terms of set and chip blocking responsibilities to deal with.
It's interesting that you mentioned Bateman because to me, there is a parallel between Hill and Bateman in terms of both of them establishing themselves this year as kind of being a tier above where they were before in the passing game.
Yeah, I would agree with that. There, obviously Bateman took an enormous step forward, but Hill certainly had his best year as well. One thing that people may not have noticed about Hill, we think of Hill as being a great special teams player. His special teams role was reduced to just a kickoff returner this last year. He's a very valuable 4-unit um, kick, punt, return, and coverage guy.
Yeah.
Played all 4 units before, and they shut his special teams down to just kickoff returns this last year because they couldn't afford for him to get hurt.
Yeah.
With him taking such a share of the running back snap load, that's honestly a very high compliment in and of itself, because they're basically having to deactivate defensive linemen to get an extra special teams player to take the place of a Justice Hill on special
Because
teams.
Justice Hill is so
Yeah.
valuable. Yeah, that's a hidden, you'd have to study the roster the way you do to kind of grasp the nature of that compliment. But yeah, that's heady stuff.
All right, let's move on. Talk a little bit about Keaton Mitchell, because he essentially lost his entire second season injury. Came back, had only 15 carries for 30 yards. After his rookie year, that's not what we were hoping for. I'll just say that after an 8-yard per carry.
Were you surprised / disappointed?
Yes, probably to both.
Interesting, because I thought last year with his injury that what we got out of Keaton Mitchell this year was about what could legitimately be expected of Keaton Mitchell this year. That was a
Okay,
devastating injury.
so the 15 carries, I'd have been okay with. I'd want it to be about 60 yards in the Ravens offense. I'd
Hmm.
want to see that he had a little bit of explosiveness when they finally got him on the field.
Yeah.
It may have been a case like Dobbins in whatever year it was, where Dobbins came back too early and then had to go back to IR.
Yep. I
Uh,
did not expect Mitchell to show any explosiveness until like December.
well, sure, but then the 15 carries fits in with that, and in particular, leading into the postseason, getting some playing time. And the biggest thing is the non-pony looks, the lack of those, the lack of using him as a jet motion flanker, whatever you want to, however you want to otherwise make him an asset. It's really telling, because that explosiveness was something really special in 23.
Yep.
And the fact they didn't use him means they didn't see that in practice at all. So I'm just hoping for a healthy 25 at this point.
So I was actually really encouraged by the Bills game. He did some kick returns right in the playoff game. I thought so he, in his regular season snaps early, I thought that he looked like a player beginning his comeback from that devastating injury, and he did not have any of the explosiveness, and I was kind of unsurprised. But I was really heartened by what he showed as a kick returner against the Bills in the playoffs.
Yeah, I'm good with that too. He's not an ideal guy back there. It sets up oftentimes a return on the other side, and then Keaton Mitchell has less value as a blocker, I think. But yeah, he's definitely a good return man, and it was worth seeing that, and good to see him do it in a game like that had some real importance at the end of a season. So you have recent historical evidence. Most recent is
Yeah.
most pertinent. So maybe there's something positive to see.
Yeah, so
I think
I thought that he had a 2-year injury to begin with, and now we're heading into year 2, and we saw some flashes of explosiveness in the playoff game. I'm actually kind of heartened. Uh, I'm less disappointed in New York because I expected nothing out of him this past year, and the flashes that he showed in the playoffs is kind of consistent with the timeline that I always associated with him.
See, I was okay with no stats. I'm not okay with no flash, and we saw no flash this year.
Mm-hmm.
Not even really. I mean, the little bit in the playoffs that doesn't meet my flash requirement.
Okay,
Okay, so I'd say he did have a 28-yard play as a receiver.
that was a nice play.
But
Yeah.
I think what we saw from Keaton Mitchell underscores the need for the Ravens to have a speed back for mesh runs. And I think Justice Hill is becoming less and less that guy as he gets a little older.
Aging. Yeah.
And it just makes sense for the Ravens to really look for speed. I think there's a general gold rush for it with the success of the Miami and Baltimore offenses in 23 in particular that we'll see play out again in the draft this year. I think a lot of guys who probably shouldn't have got drafted, maybe got drafted for speed alone.
Like Rasheen Ali, for example.
Well, he's not even that fast, but yeah, I'd really be talking about the guys who were like 442, 443 and below and faster. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there's just we saw it on defense. We saw it at wide receiver with Worthy getting drafted in the first round, with Wiggins, having the really high pedigree that he did. Anyway, I think we'll see that again, and hopefully we see a year out of Keaton Mitchell that makes us be excited about Keaton Mitchell again in 25.
Yeah, so I'm more optimistic about that than you are, because what I saw this past season was consistent with my expectations from his injury.
Okay. All right. Well, fair enough. We'll talk about Patrick Ricard, the last of the Ravens. Really,
actually, before we move off of Keaton Mitchell, do you think that so Rasheen Ali didn't show much. Keaton Mitchell, has his injury questions around him. Justice Hill is aging. Do you see value in the Ravens spending a draft pick on a speed back?
Yes, but I'd be happy with a pure speed guy and hope they could get him in a later round. I mean, if you look at Keaton Mitchell, he was not a small school back, but he was not a Power 5 back. And so that meant that they got him a little cheaper, despite the fact that he was a 437 guy. They also compromised on size.
Yes.
And you can do that. You should be able to get a speed back. And there should be things about that'll be very effective with the Ravens offense, because their offense is all about misdirection, and speed kills.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on. Talk about Patrick Ricard here.
Moving off of the speed topic. Go to Patrick Ricard.
He got his 5th Pro Bowl, and I was shocked to see this is his first AP1. I guess Juszczyk has been dominating.
Juszczyk has been,
in these years. But it still is amazing that this is the first time he's got it. He was at 64% of snaps in 2022. The last 2 years, 39% in 23 and 40% in 24 under Monken.
Yep.
So definitely de-emphasized, much more in-line usage than in the backfield specifically. So kind of a different space for Patrick Ricard to be in. First of all, what'd you think of his year? And second of all, what do you think the Ravens' strategy ought to be with him going forward?
So he was a player when Todd Monken was hired that I thought would have no role in 2023. I thought that Todd Monken had no use for a fullback. And Ricard has some unique qualities: his sheer size, his strength, his adaptability, his vision for blocking. Like he's really tremendous at what he does. And I think he forced his way onto the field. And I think that he, not so much in 2024, but in 2023, I thought he rescued some pass blocking games that were going negatively, where Monken inserted him to help with pass blocking. And I thought that he had a big role there, not so much this past year. I think that 40%-ish is about the max that we can ever expect Todd Monken to use a fullback. And I think that as Patrick Ricard ages out of being an exceptional player who forces his way onto the field, I think that you'll see fullback usage percentages with Todd Monken drift down more towards like the 15% range.
All of that makes a lot of sense to me, particularly in terms of the aggregate usage at fullback. If it's not Patrick Ricard, if they're not spending money at the position, there's less of a impetus to get that player on the field. And obviously, Patrick Ricard, specifically being as useful as he is, makes it exceptionally important to get him on the field and get him used. I think the Ravens are at some point where they will start over after have a post Ricard era. a year ago, 2 years ago, the issue with Ricard had been second hip injury, different hip, and how long can this continue kind of thing. And at some point, they're going to want to avoid an old maid contract with Ricard. That's never going to be a lot of money. Ricard probably signed for, 3 years, $9 million. If he plays 2, the Ravens will probably be okay with it. But that's the old maid contract. And they just signed one or at the end of one with Michael Pierce. And Michael Pierce, there's a good chance he's not going to come back for his last year. That, getting his helmet signed is pretty strong indication that he's retiring.
So Ricard is 30 and Ricard is a free agent.
Yep. UFA.
Interesting.
So they have to re-sign him, and whether it's 2-3 years, whatever they do, he's one of the few. Well, they have a lot of UFAs, but he and McCary and Stanley and Jones are 4 of the important ones. The rest of them, I think, Stevens in that group, in the rest of them category, that I think they're gonna probably let go. And they have other guys who are like these 1-year guys, like Tylan Wallace might get a 2-year deal.
Yeah,
might get a 1-year deal on a qualified veteran contract, which means they could pay him an extra $1 million that doesn't count against the cap.
Oh, that's nice.
So they've got a bunch of guys, who fit in the vet minimum, Board, Harrison, those kind of guys, but they don't have a ton of high profile free agents after the big 4. So Ricard being a big name.
So one of the things that I was thinking was that, so obviously Todd Monken is not in charge of the roster, but I kind of think that if he had his preference, they would, rather than field a fullback, they would spend more capital, whether it's draft or free agent capital, on a stud guard or maybe 2, like just get some more beef in the interior. Lose, he doesn't have to give up an eligible receiver, like he can put a fast guy out there, but get more beef blocking by spending more.
They did a lot of OL6 blocking at the end of the year. And it was interesting because when they had Jones out there, they had him out there 15 times in one game. Might have been the Pittsburgh game, but whichever game it was, they ran basically the same formation on probably 14 of those plays, where they had him out on a little wing. They had the same 1-2-2 formation as we recorded on our sheet, meaning there's one wide receiver and he's actually kind of tight to the line of scrimmage, usually Tylan Wallace. There's 2 tight ends, 1 on each side, and there's 2 in the backfield. And it's all in the running out the game kind of frame that they were doing this. But it's they're basically dropping their pants until they get to do exactly what they're doing in terms of their play call coming up.
Right.
And it was still effective. They could do some of that, but I think in general, the offensive line rebuild, retooling, whatever you want to call it, is going to have to continue on. Period. They're probably going to have to draft 3 offensive linemen, I would say, of the 11 picks this year.
I thought they had to draft 2 or 3 last year, and they didn't. So I don't know that they're going to see it the same way you did. But I would like to see them.
And one of them doesn't really count because he was never really considered seriously for playing time. Samac.
Yeah.
But Rosengarten exceeded all expectations in terms of being a tackle who was way ahead of where he was slotted.
Right. Very young player too. High upside guy. So yeah, so I felt last year they needed to spend high-ish resource, let's say top 4 pick on the tackle that they did get, and I wanted to see a guard last year as well. So I feel like this year we, depending on what happens with Stanley, we at least need a guard and perhaps a tackle as well.
They had chances, and they took Rasheen Ali instead, and they took Devin Leary instead, and they made some picks that didn't make any sense. I mean, frankly, did not make any sense. So I think might have been 2 guards on my list that were still there, and the 5th round that I liked. But anyway, it's spent some cost at this point. So let's move on from Ricard. 3 other guys saw some playing.
So I'm sorry. So do you see Ricard being re-signed?
I think if I had to guess, I think he'll make it attractive enough that it will happen.
Like a 2-year deal, 3-year deal, something like that.
Let's say, how about 2 years, $5.5 million?
Okay.
All right.
3 years, $7 million. 3 years, $8 million. With a team option
every
for that
year you add increases the old maid risk, and I wouldn't really be looking to do that. I'd be looking to make the contract shorter, not longer. Go for another re-signing when you need to. Ricard is essentially a guy who's who is extraordinarily deserving. If they get, I mean, 2 years 5.5 is even lower than can even practically be, because if they wanted to, they just give him a qualified veteran contract and give him 2.7 for 1 year. Maybe it might be 2.8 or 2.9 this year, with $1 million of that not counting against the cap. They have 2 of those to use, by the way. One of them should go to Tylan Wallace. One of them, if Patrick Ricard is a guy, he'd be perfect for it. He'd be perfect for it. I just don't know if he'd play for that. And that de-risks any kind of old maid situation, by the way.
Is he a player who is more valuable to the Ravens than he would be to any other squad other than perhaps the Chargers?
Or maybe the Eagles, if they decided they wanted to do that. I mean, there's other teams who use a fullback.
Yeah.
The Chargers are probably the team exactly who would be excited to know that he was leaving the Ravens.
Yeah.
And that may increase his value all in and of itself. But
so he is a player that they could lowball.
Yeah. If you think about some of the things that are going on with Patrick Ricard's life, I don't know how much money he's making from his Pizza Bowly ads, but he'd have to get new ads. This is no kidding about this.
That's true. That's true.
He'd have to get new ads. He might be the big Royal Farms State spokesman now. I mean, seriously, Justin Tucker's got to be out.
Yeah,
I mean, and that means that somebody else has to be in, and Patrick Ricard's a great choice.
He really is a great
playing for the Ravens.
He's affable, he's friendly, he's smiley. People know him. He's exactly the right profile too. He's not too big a star. Yeah,
very very common man kind of guy, and in a very uncommon way. So it's he's very very likable.
So that's true. Yeah, some of his endorsement opportunities are greater in Baltimore than they are elsewhere.
I would think. I would think, and if he went out and played in, I think I always say San Diego, but if he went out and played in Los Angeles, obviously Los Angeles has a lot of opportunities for marketability.
I said San Diego too, didn't I? No, I said the Chargers, but
okay.
Yeah, so Greg Roman would want him, but I mean, in terms of competitive salary cap money, that's really kind of the only source of competition potentially, I would think.
All right, we're running way over here.
Yeah,
I'm giving you the hook. We're gonna have to move on. Others, Chris Collier played a little bit. Rasheen Olay played a little bit. John Kelly played a little bit.
I've never heard of John Kelly.
John Kelly made the roster 3 times, I think, as an elevation. He might have even been elevated to the roster very briefly, and then he was cut. And same thing with Collier. But basically, if you're a basketball fan, so you understand the relevance of this. Generic big men are always thought about their greatest asset is 5 fouls to give.
Yes.
And sometimes with some of these backup running backs, their greatest asset was three practice squad elevations, and then they're done. And that was the case with Kelly and with Collier, who both went on. Collier, I think, actually went on to play for the Chargers or Las Vegas. I think it's Las Vegas. He played a little bit for them after he's done with the Ravens.
I mean, replacement level running backs have got to be the most fungible, like the most. Like whatever the opposite is of scarce, the most abundant resource in the NFL landscape has got to be the replacement level running back, I would think.
I'm not aware of whether or not there's a rule against this, but if 2 teams each had such a running back and neither was particularly excited by the player, and nobody's going to be excited about John Kelly.
Yeah.
Generic special teams player, been in the league a long time. He's run the ball for like 24 carries for 72 yards career, I think, coming into this year with some ridiculously low total like that. So 3 yards a carry. Nobody's excited by that, but still he's finding a way onto NFL rosters because he can play special teams and be that third running back in an emergency situation in a game.
And he's got to be smart, right? There's a lot of playbook considerations that go into
I'm
that.
sure there's lots of positives in terms of work ethic, practice, all that. So there's some reason why he's getting on the field for the NFL. But if you can identify another team who has a player like that, I say, look, Los Angeles, we have a long history of understanding each other's talent here. You have Chris Collier and we have John Kelly. How about you activate your guy for the first 3 games? We activate our for the first 3 games.
And then we'll swap. We'll
trade them. And then launder their elevations. That was done in the 1980s, by the way. If you remember the old baseball player Floyd Rayford.
Oh, yeah. Honey Bear.
Is a big ball of baseball player, had no business being on a baseball field, really didn't like to catch, which the Ravens had a whole bunch of catchers in that era who didn't want to catch.
The Orioles had a whole bunch
Williams. The Orioles did. But anyway, the Floyd Rayford ended up at third base, and he was out of options. They wanted to send him back to the minor leagues, and they couldn't do it. So they traded him to the Cardinals and then got him back from the Cardinals in a second trade. And both the players exchanged were like really nobody's. And then they had his options laundered, and they could send him down to the minor leagues again. So it was a weird kind of situation. Rayford had to be paid off in that deal because there's no other way he would have not filed whatever grievance would have been possible back in that day.
There was a great baseball writer for the Washington Post named Tom Boswell, columnist for many, many years for them, and he wrote a lot about the Honey Bear and how he gave Earl Weaver the thing that Weaver valued the most, which was moves, because he could just move him, like he could put him in for something, he could move him a catcher, and he just Earl loved him, not because he could play, but because he could be plugged in so many different places.
In 1985, Floyd Rayford hit 306 on the season, had 18 homers, and the end was already apparent because he had only 10 walks. And if you looked at that season, 18 homers to 10 walks is like it's the most home runs ever by a player who had 10 or fewer walks in the history of Major League Baseball at the time. It may have been broken since, by the way, but it was the kind of number that walks leading indicator is to economics what walks are to future hitting statistics.
Yeah,
and this was a case where boy, his career went down the toilet. Hit 171 the next year, was out of baseball very shortly.
Weaver also a guy who paid a lot of attention to walk statistics, so
yep.
He would have been very keen to that.
He was great. He understood that. All right, let's look ahead at 2025 needs for a little bit. We talked about a speed back whether it's a late round pick or a UDFA guy they like, maybe from a small school. Give me a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being the highest, how much you would feel that's important. I'm gonna write mine down separately.
Mine's conditional. The condition is if my optimism about Keaton Mitchell is rewarded and justified, then that becomes low. Without Keaton Mitchell returning to something like 85% of what he showed in 2023, I'm going to say it's a 4.
Okay, and I'm going to say you don't know when you have to make this decision in April, so I'm going to say it's a 4 also.
Okay.
Right.
But I have much higher hopes for Mitchell than you have. So I shouldn't say hopes, much expectations, much higher expectations.
That might be fair.
Yeah.
Determining if there is a reasonable price to re-sign Ricard, how important is that to the Ravens offseason this year? And I'm going to write down a number also.
Jesus, is this 1 to 5 also?
Same thing, 1 to 5, 5 the highest.
I'm gonna punt and say it's a 3. I'm gonna say that it's kind of neutral. But there are consequences dependent on not extending him.
Okay, I'm with you exactly in terms of it being a 3. So we're the same exact place. No need to microanalyze this. But the thing I would say about this is that the Ravens, I trust the Ravens to make the right decision on Ricard. If they're going to move on from Patrick Ricard, it's because the money isn't quite right, and they think they can get 80% of the player at 20% of the price. And
see, I would hope that if they are moving on from Ricard, it's because they are going to beef up at guard and play more 3 wide receivers. So to me, there's a personnel shift involved in moving on from Ricard, and a philosophical offensive shift involved in moving on from Ricard.
Okay. All right. That certainly could possibly be true. Okay. Now extend Derrick Henry. Now the question is, how important is it to the Ravens offseason to do it now as opposed to rolling the dice and seeing where you are at the end of the year? See if you want to do it. You got the value of not having an old maid contract. So what's the importance of extending him right now as opposed to letting it go to the end of the year?
In the interest of not sounding like a curmudgeonly hater, I'm going to say 2.
Okay, 2 is where I am too. Is that I think the
but Ravens I really think it's a 1.
Okay. So he just had a terrific year, obviously.
Yes.
And he could have another terrific year.
Yes.
And if he does, I'm afraid he'll be priced out of Baltimore anyway.
I don't care how great a goddamn year a 31-year-old running back has. I don't want to pay money to a 32-year-old running back. I don't
Okay,
care if it's
no,
Emmitt
no, no,
Smith.
no.
I don't care if it's
Mm.
Walter Payton. Maybe if it's Jim Brown, we'll think about it. But no, it's 31-year-old running backs are a declining market, and there's no reason to get into that market. Derrick Henry had tremendous value for the 2024 Ravens in not just his statistical impact, but also in his influencing Lamar to move toward being a certain kind of quarterback who hands off more than he keeps it. That's an overstatement, but you know what I mean? Like it's shifting the way Lamar plays. Derrick Henry's already done that job, and by 2025, he will have done that job even more. That job is over. There's no need, to me, there's no need to extend him.
I would look at it. I would come up with the same rating, but for different reasons. And
Okay.
my different reason is that I think you're better off taking the gamble than paying what I think the price would be today. It's just as simple as that. I think you could get value out of Henry. You do run the risk of an old maid year if you extend him now, and you can structure that in different ways. The first Henry contract was unbelievably team friendly in terms of having, currently they could still cut Derrick Henry and save $9 million against the cap.
Right.
They're not going to do it,
No.
but they could. And that you could structure the additional year in such a way that will not be that friendly, but would still be team friendly.
To what end? What are you accomplishing by doing that?
You have an option on his 2025 year at
All right.
maybe you pay $2 million for the right to pay him $8 million or
In
$10 million
26.
more in 26. That's exactly what you'd be buying. Yeah.
All right. So you're buying an option on 2026.
Yeah. And then he might decide he's not going to play the season. I'm not that concerned about an old maid contract in the Henry case, with the exception of injury. And since he hasn't been through a lot of that already in his career, he's had some minor injuries, but nothing really significant so far. If he were to miss 3/4 of the year, say, and be dealing with some knee injury for the first time in his career, I think the chance is actually less of him hanging it up on the first rehab. I think he'll go through it. I think some of the ways he works out in the offseason lend themselves to a guy who is most suited to rehab.
Yeah.
No, I think
you're saying that his existing habits would help him crush a rehab, like just
yes,
yeah. I agree.
Yeah. All right. A ton of fun doing this with you, Jim. Any other comments you have before I cut you off and we go off air here? Because
I want to start on the MVP thing again, but you probably don't have patience for that. So no.
Well, I appreciate we were way over time here as usual, and that's okay. Jim, always a pleasure talking football with you. Of
Ken,
course.
I am so happy always to be invited. So yeah, this is a blast for me.
The issue that I have with you is not an uncommon one with a lot of guests, is that we only get to talk so often. And I love talking football with you. I love hearing what you have to say about a variety of issues. So in this running back thing, we talked about the tight ends, the MVP vote, all of these other things about wide receivers and whatnot. And it's hard for us to focus on the one thing. And that's always an issue when you're having great conversation. So I appreciate you, Jim. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you.
Other folks out there, thanks for being the listeners you are. We really appreciate all the additional people who've taken on this pod this year. If you're on YouTube, please like and subscribe. And if you're not,
and subscribe, do that too.
Yeah, you can do that if you figure out how to do it. And then anybody else you want to tell about the show, maybe that doesn't know about it. I meet people all the time who've never heard of the show, of course. So I know there are plenty of people out there who have it. So please tell them about it if you think they'd like it. And the kind of audience that probably likes this. And since you're listening, it's probably somebody you work with who might be a good choice to do that. Anyway, Jim, thanks again for coming on.
Thank you, Ken.
And we'll talk to you next time on Film Study.